Welcome back to Things You Don't Know. I'm Dr. Weaver, and I'm here with my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Deneen and Chandler Foster.
Well, hello, everybody. Tonight, we are laying out the case in clear terms. Because if you think that pandemic cycles are real, then you deserve a structured argument, not vibes.
Yes, indeed. Let's lay out a little roadmap for this particular episode. We're going to talk about what cyclical can mean in disease. We're also going to talk about patterns we really see: influenza, plague, and waves. We're also going to talk about why the patterns happen: the ecology, war, trade, immunity, evolution. We're also going to talk about cosmic delivery idea, the idea that meteorites, microbial survival, and hard limits may really exist. We're also going to talk about the repeating catastrophic secrecy and delayed response. And we'll talk about what the U.S. withdrawal from WHO, the WHO, World Health Organization, could mean for outbreaks and coordination. And lastly, we're going to give you a verdict. What cycle, what's coincident, and what's human error means. So let's start with what cyclical means.
When someone says pandemics are cyclical, I hear three possible claims. Let's separate them out and talk about them a little bit. Number one, seasonality. Seasonality. Respiratory viruses often surge in the colder months. That's not mysterious. Behaviors and environments shift and are often an underlying factor. Two, waves within one pandemic. A single outbreak can come in multiple surges, peaks separated by months. The second or third wave is usually more dangerous because the virus mutates and becomes stronger. Three, long cycle recurrence. Long cycle recurrence. Major pandemics reappear ever so often, not on a perfect schedule, but because the world recreates conditions that favor spread.
Historically, that third one is the trickiest. Disease doesn't follow a calendar like a comet, but conditions do repeat, especially when trade networks expand, wars displace people, and ecological pressures shift human-animal contact.
So the cycle might not be like a clock, it may be recurring vulnerability.
Which is a big difference. Not it's due again, but we keep on relighting the same fuse. Let's talk about what patterns we actually see. Let me take influenza first. People look at flu pandemics and think, okay, it just keeps coming back. That part is true. The spacing is not neat, but the recurrence is real.
And modern reviews emphasize that influenza is continuously evolving. Descendants of the 1918 virus lineage, for example, persisted in various forms and contributed to later influenza dynamics.
Now, what feels cyclical with flu is often the interplay of viral change and population immunity. Immunity rises after waves, then wanes or gets bypassed as viruses mutate and reassort. Plagues have centuries of return, not a single event. Now, plague gives a stronger returning over centuries impression because the second plague pandemic was not one outbreak. After the Black Death, plague recurred repeatedly in many regions for generations.
So if you lived through one plague wave, you didn't get to say, glad that's over forever. It could come back.
And modern modeling work looks at why outbreaks accelerated in certain cities and periods, suggesting changing conditions can intensify recurrence.
And waves aren't rare. The 1918 influenza pandemic is famous for multiple waves, with a devastating surge in late 1918 in many places.
Yeah, a well known case. The 1918 Philadelphia parade is often used as a blunt example of how mass gatherings amplify spread.
And wartime troop movements and crowding were key accelerants. Check out our Spanish flu podcast to learn more about that. Mixing people, moving them, and then mixing them again.
Now let's focus on why these outbreaks can cycle. Here's the part that makes the cycle idea feel real. The drivers repeat climate and ecology, rainfall, temperature, harvests, animal host shifting, war and disruption, crowding displacement, sanitation breakdown, trade and mobility. Pathogens ride networks, ships then, planes now. Immunity landscapes. Immunity rises after outbreaks, then fades away or gets outmaneuvered.
By the mutation of the virus, it gets outmaneuvered, right?
Absolutely. The mutation of the virus does get outmaneuvered. Urbanization and inequality, dense living plus weak healthcare capacity equals amplification.
These aren't abstract. Even recent scholarship tries to connect big historical shocks like environmental disruption and trade dynamics to pandemic, ignition, and spread.
So when people say it's cyclical, what they may be correctly noticing is that humans repeatedly assemble the same risk architecture.
In other words, the cycle might be us. Could pathogens arrive via meteorites? Do you think so? I think so. So, let's do the controversial section without turning our brains completely off. The claim isn't that aliens did it. The claim is, can biology travel?
NASA's astrobiology program has discussed panspermia as a hypothesis worth thinking about carefully.
You know, there are several tiers here, at least two. The first tier is organic molecules from space. Meteorites can carry organic compounds relevant to life's chemistry. That's not the same as carrying a working pandemic virus, but it's a real space to Earth chemistry bridge. Second tier is that living microbes survive space under certain kind of conditions. Experiments from Japan's Tonpompo mission and related work suggest some hardy microbes can survive space exposure when shielded, like if they're encased, like within clumps where the outer layers protect the inner layers.
So, microbes can be tougher than intuition gives them credit for.
Yes, some are. But now there are some limits. Let's look at those. The hard limits for meteorite viruses in a 2025 PLOS pathogens piece on virolithopanspermia makes a key point. Viruses need host cells to replicate, and in space or on arrival, finding suitable hosts is kind of a major barrier.
And then there's another problem contamination. A peer reviewed study on a returned Ryugu asteroid sample found rapid colonization by terrestrial microorganisms, illustrating how quickly, quote, Earth life can move in, complicating claims about what was originally in the sample.
You know, one of the things here, Dr. Deneen, is that yes, things can be contaminated by terrestrial microorganisms, but what if they join together? they kind of like each other and they mutate again, so that then they're more adaptable to infecting us.
That's terrifying, Dr. Weaver.
Yeah, it is. And so if someone says that we found life in a space rock, the first question is, oh, or did Earth life hitchhike afterwards?
Exactamundo. So, how do we honor the idea without overstating it? Well, this is the responsible summary. Microbial survival and panspermia are discussable hypotheses with experimental hints. Also, space delivered human pandemic viruses are not completely established, and biology plus contamination issues make that claim a high bar. Now, the stronger cycle story still lives on Earth. Ecology, evolution, conflict, and networks all play a part in this.
The idea that government cover-ups have consistently caused wider disease, well, let's define it even more cleanly so that nobody can dodge. Sometimes it's literal censorship, and sometimes it's under reporting, and sometimes it's don't panic messaging that delays action. And sometimes it's punishing whistleblowers, just like Trump is doing. Different forms, same outcome, lost time.
The 1918 pandemic was shaped by wartime information control under the Espionage Act. Scholarly commentary notes that wartime censorship and the competing focus on the First World War limited attention and transparency early on.
As you pointed out to me, Dr. Deneen, the Sedition Act was passed as a way to control this so that you could actually be prosecuted for various things like wearing a mask in public because it might panic people, or saying something about the pandemic that was happening, et cetera, et cetera. So when leaders minimize risk, people keep gathering. Philadelphia's 1918 parade is still used as a cautionary case about timing and mass events.
This is the cruel math. Exponential spread doesn't care about morale. If you hide reality to maintain normal, you manufacture catastrophe.
Oh, what a good way to put that, Chandler. You manufacture
Yes, you do.
catastrophe by government cover up. Cool. Now, SARS is often discussed as a transparency lesson. Analysis of the China response emphasized that once SARS became notifiable and strong measures were implemented, it was contained fairly rapidly. But delays and uneven early reporting cost time and caused a lot more spread.
And there's the human story. Dr. Zhang Yangyong became known for exposing underreporting in Beijing during SARS, an example of whistleblowing intersecting with outbreak control and politics.
Which is a recurring theme. The early messengers are treated like the problem until the outbreak becomes too large to hide.
Yeah, internationally, there are formal expectations for rapid notifications under the IHR, or International Health Regulations, including assessment timelines and notifying who quickly when an event may be a public health emergency.
And that's really important. That's really important. The world built rules specifically because delay is deadly. The US withdrawing from WHO seems to me to be a potential disaster. Let's look at some of the bad things that can do to the pandemic risk. Now, let's anchor the timeline here because this is current. Trump issued an executive order in January of 2025, almost a year ago, initiating withdrawal. from the World Health Organization. Reporting from the UN and the Reuters put the effective exit date of January 22nd, 2026, just 2 weeks from now, folks. That's not long. It feels like we're signing our death warrant for the U.S. here.
WHO publicly regretted the intent to withdraw, and analysis from Congress's own research arm described actions like pausing funding and recalling or resigning personnel engaged with WHO. This means the United States no longer has access to research and information from WHO.
And I personally know some people who are suffering egregiously because of that, and have been since we initiated withdrawal. They're not able to get some of the medications and treatment that had been approved through WHO. One of the other things here is that it feels to me like we are in the midst of another influenza pandemic. I have very reliable information that people from all sections of the US, I'm talking about Hawaii, Washington State, California, New Jersey, Virginia, and Cincinnati, Ohio, are experiencing this current flu, or this more correctly termed virus, and that, as usual, the government is withholding data and information. So, what are the plausible effects on viruses, pandemics, and other diseases? A few categories. First, less global coordination and early warning integration. WHO describes its AIHR role as maintaining global early warning through surveillance and information sharing and coordinating response efforts. WHO also facilitates networks like GOARN for mobilizing outbreak expertise across institutions.
So, if you step away, you're not just saving dues. You're stepping back from a coordination hub that was built for cross-border outbreaks. Let's talk about disruption and reduced capacity. Reuters reporting has described the WHO, or the World Health Organization, budget stress tied to donor pullbacks, and specifically noted that the U.S. has the largest financial backer, around 18% of overall funding in that reporting, driving cuts and disruptions. And that comes from Reuters.
Multiple analyses warn that weakening global programs, tuberculosis, HIV, malaria, emergency response of all kinds, doesn't stay over there. It rebounds through travel, trade, and mutation opportunity.
Yep, and that's the cycle there, folks. Again, if global detection and control weaken, then you increase the odds of the next wave that reaches everyone.
Even if the US continues bilateral surveillance and uses CDC partnerships, WHO is the place where countries share structured outbreak signals under IHR processes and where coordination and guidance are centralized.
So withdrawal can mean less influence over standards and potentially less immediate access to the full multilateral picture. And that's really scary when you think about it.
It is. Pandemics reward cooperation. When major powers disengage from multilateral systems, coordination can fracture. And that's exactly when cover ups, rumor, and delayed reporting become more tempting.
And if this episode is about cycles, that is a scary one. Disengagement, fragmentation, slower alerts, bigger outbreaks, very scary. Now, verdict time. I'm going to put it bluntly, and you two correct me if I overreach here.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. 1. There are real repeating patterns, but not a perfect schedule. The cycle is often repeated. Conditions mobility, war, ecology, community, inequality, more than destiny.
That's accurate.
Okay. And number two, the meteorite virus idea. Well, it's intriguing, but it's not been proven as an explanation for historical human pandemics. Microbial survival has some experimental support, but viruses face replications and host barriers, and contamination is a major confounder.
Yes, as you say, microbial survival has some experimental support.
All right. And number three, the most reliable cycle is human behavior, especially secrecy, delayed reporting, and political minimization. And that's just a loop that keeps on paying the same price over and over again. And that's time lost and trust destroyed, spread, amplified.
Yep, that is the heart of it.
If you want to break the cycle, ladies and gentlemen, it's not mystical, it's structural. Surveillance, hospitals, public communication, and transparency.
And international coordination, because viruses do not need passports. If you weaken the systems built to share alerts and mobilize response, you're not opting out of pandemics. You're opting out of preparedness.
When you hear cycles, do you think biology, mutation, and immunity, or society, world, trade, denial? Send us your answer. If you want more to this, we'd be happy to supply it. There's a lot of more information, and I would urge our listeners to be prepared to look at things around them and see.
Listen, thank you for listening to this episode of Things You Don't Know. And guys, I want to encourage you to stay curious, stay in the know, and always stay prepared because there's always something coming down the pike. See you next time, folks.
Goodbye, everybody.
Yes, indeed. Bye for now.